Okay, let's bring in the Liberal Senator Hollie Hughes and the Labor MP Matt Thistlethwaite. You're not at church because you'd rather be here on First Edition, and I don't blame you for that. Good morning. First of all, I'll start with you, Matt. We'll just pick up on those comments from David Littleproud there. He says that it's going to be a tax on every Australian. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that the Nationals and the Coalition are going to continue to be out of touch. The election result was pretty clear, Pete. Australians voted for stronger action on climate change. This was one of the key centrepiece policies of Labor's election agenda, and we believe that we have a mandate to implement our policies, including a stronger medium-term target of a 43% reduction, boosting solar, boosting batteries, making electric vehicles cheaper. And it'll be one of the first pieces of legislation that we'll seek to introduce into the Parliament this week, and we'll negotiate with the crossbenchers and other parties, including the Nationals, but we won't be moving away from the core principles of that policy, and that is stronger action on climate change.
So what ground have you given up to secure the support of the Greens?
Well, we've said all along that we look at sensible amendments that strengthen the policy, and that's going on at the moment, of course. But I think we need to be conscious of the fact, Pete, that Labor's policy was independently modelled by Reputex, and it pointed out that there would be jobs growth. It pointed out that over time electricity would be cheaper because renewables are cheaper, and that it would boost investment in those renewables. And we don't want to move away from those principles because we took the time to have that policy independently costed. So the principles will remain in place, but if there are sensible amendments that strengthen the policy, of course we'll look at those.
Right, like a ratchet mechanism.
Well, all of this needs to be looked at, and we'll have to wait and see what comes out at the end of the day. But we need to make sure that it's a policy that gets through, because Australians do want stronger action on climate change. And we'll look at amendments that strengthen that provisions.
Okay, Hollie, what's your thoughts on that? Does Matt have a point there? Isn't Labor just giving the people what they want following the results of the election this year?
No, I think we're more concerned that Labor's giving the Greens what they want, and we can see that by the fact that we haven't got a copy of the legislation. I'm the Shadow Assistant Minister for Energy and Climate Change, and I certainly haven't had any discussions with the Labor Party because they're not interested in talking to the Liberal Party or the National Party for that matter about this. They're only interested in talking to the Greens, and we can see, we can't say more to the point what they're doing to sidle up to them to secure those votes. We know the Greens want a 75% emissions target to be legislated. What I don't think a lot of people understand when they talk about the difference between a target and a legislative mandate means that once you legislate, you actually take the power away from the Parliament. You take the power away from the elected politicians, you put it in the hands of the bureaucrats. You will be imposing taxes. You also remove your ability to actually act in a responsive manner. If you see what's happened from the election, we had the war in Ukraine beforehand, but since the election we've had AEMO step into the market. We're going to see the closure of every coal mine if you see this legislation of 43%. So Australians are going to be paying more. The Labor Party said that they were going to reduce power bills by $275. Well, I can tell you what, if that ever happens, I'll take my $275 and take Matt out for dinner. That is never going to happen, and everyone is now starting to recognise that. We are seeing power bills continue to rise. It is going to put the impact on everyday Australians, on family budgets, cost of living pressures. That's where we should be focused. And instead, we're focused on this virtue signalling and sidling up to the Greens to legislate, which is something that's going to create great problems into the future. OK,
Matt, I'm assuming Chris Bowen is still working on the legislation and still negotiating, but why wouldn't a copy or some of that information be provided to the Coalition to have a look at?
Well, the Coalition have made their position pretty clear that they're opposed to it and they won't negotiate. So it appears there's no negotiation to go on. And the ordinary course is that the opposition will get a copy of the legislation once it's introduced into the Parliament this week. But we're happy to talk to the Coalition if they're willing to look at sensible amendments to the legislation. But they've said that they're not willing to do that. So if you've got limited time, when you're trying to negotiate amendments to this legislation so that it can be delivered through the Parliament, obviously you devote your resources to people that are willing to negotiate and willing to have a look at sensible amendments. And the Coalition have said they're simply not willing to do that, that their mind's made up and they won't countenance any change. And I think that represents them being stuck in the past, really, that the Australian public have moved on and they want stronger action on climate change.
Hollie, are you expecting any members of the coalition to cross the floor?
I think members of the coalition need to have a very good look at what happened, even on the weekend, with regards to the Victorian pre-selection that just occurred, where the shadow Energy Minister down there, after the Liberals in Victoria decided to announce a 50% legislated emission. Now, there's a couple of factors there. This guy not only lost his pre-selection, he came dead last, which I think shows what Liberal Party membership thinks of legislation. But what I think it also shows is members of the Liberal Party understand, if you read the Constitution, if Labor legislate a 43% emission, then it overrides any of these states. But we've seen Victoria call this out, and their state Liberal shadow member for that lost his seat. We've seen WA go down a similar path, and the WA Liberals, and they've been reduced to those that fit on a tandem bike. So this is not something that Liberals support. I think if Liberal and National members want to think about crossing the floor, they might want to look at what the views of their own party are before they do that. But of course, in the Liberal Party, we do have a tradition. You can cross the floor if you want, but it's not something I'd be recommending highly to them.
So there is a possibility that some moderates in inner city seats, I mean, even Senator Andrew Bragg has been mentioned as someone who could cross the floor. Maybe they'd do that to lessen their chances of losing seats to Greens or Teals in 3 years' time. Is that a possibility?
Well, I don't think moving to the left on these issues, trying to out-Teal the Teal, is going to do anything. And I think once Australians start to see the impacts this is going to have on their budget, on their family's budget, on impacts on their investment, when they can't turn the lights on, when they're being told they can't put their dishwasher on after 6 o'clock at night, I think a lot of Australians, regardless of where they live, are going to start to reflect on these policies and whether or not this is what their greatest challenge is. And we've even seen in surveys and research that's been done post the election, post the power going out, post these power increases, that the main issue affecting Australians, what they are worried about, is cost of living pressures, and this bill will do nothing but put further pressure on that. Okay,
there is a sporting issue I want to ask you. We're almost out of time, but I do want to get your thoughts on it because it's bubbling away at the moment. Nat, it's the story about 7 Manly players. They don't want to wear the Pride jersey in the NRL round this Thursday night because of religious reasons. Do you support them in that move?
Well, look, Pete, I grew up supporting the Rabbitohs, a lifelong Rabbitohs supporter, and one of my heroes growing up was Ian Roberts. He grew up in the area that I represent, played for Mascot as a junior and then went on to represent the Rabbitohs. And, you know, I take a lot in his comments about this. He said that, you know, he battled during his playing days for respect and inclusiveness, and, you know, issues and arguments such as this, he thinks you know, make it more tough for young gay men in our community and gay people. And I think that the NRL has done a lot in recent years to promote inclusiveness. Having said that, Manly probably should have consulted with the players about this, and I think that they're going to have to sit down with the players over the course of the next couple of days and try and sort this out.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on this one, Hollie? It's a big water cooler conversation today.
Look, I've been thinking about this morning, and someone needs to explain the definition of irony to these people. This jersey is apparently supposed to be about inclusiveness, but it's certainly not inclusive of people that have strong religious views. It's a marketing decision. Clearly, I think the players have made their position clear. I said they've got their statement. Manly is in the business of playing rugby league, not virtue signalling, not making political statements. Does it mean that they're not inclusive of gay and lesbian people when they're not wearing this jersey? I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But that said, my partner's a Sydney Roosters fan. I'm pretty sure they're pretty happy that they're going to see players step out of the game when these teams are both vying to get in the top 8. To the point that my partner's dog's called Braith. So I'm pretty sure the Roosters fans are going to be happy that 7 of their players are stepping out.
Okay. Matt and Hollie, appreciate I got that. Appreciate your time this morning, Hollie and Matt. Thank you, and best of luck for the new working year.